Hello and welcome to Get Rich Slow, the podcast that challenges the conventional get-rich-quick ideology and explores what authentic success really means and how you can achieve it. I'm Hannah Martin, the founder of Talented Ladies Club, and today I am joined by Emma Langton, a leadership coaching and wellbeing trainer, for an episode on enforcing boundaries. Hi, Emma.
Hello, it's lovely to be here.
Thank you for joining me. Before we get started, I want to ask a question I ask all my guests, and that is, what does success mean to you?
It's a great question, isn't it? It's such a great question. You know, for me, success has changed over my lifetime. When we'll kind of touch on, the reasons why I am passionate about boundaries. But when I adopted my girls, sometimes the success was just getting through each day. And but since COVID, it's actually been about keeping my business going, because there was a lot of places, that didn't make it. So it kind of makes you grateful for what you have. I do like earning money. It affords holidays and breaks and family time and gives me flexibility and things like that. However, success for me is much more about how much I enjoy life and how well I am, hence the kind of link to well-being and things like that as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So today we're talking about what is a really, really important topic. And I know it's something that's always in flux in our lives as well, I think. I don't think we kind of set out and go, right, my boundaries are done. That's it. I'm going to live my life and I'm never going to have to look at them again. I think it's something that we all need to look at all the time and revisit. So if you could explain to us, what are boundaries and why are they so important?
Okay. So I think there's a big kind of misconception about what boundaries are for an awful lot of people, including me at one point. So the reason I got really passionate about boundaries was because I adopted my two girls, and this was like 15 years ago. And the social workers said to us, they just need firm boundaries. And I'd been in a corporate environment, a male-dominated corporate environment, at kind of director level. And I was like, I can do boundaries. I can stop people doing this and say yes and no and whatever. But I realised with the girls very quickly, it's not just about kind of gatekeeping and deciding who does what or where or when, like I used to do in those sort of corporate boardrooms. So what I learned because of the girls about the boundaries are essentially it gives us that kind of core of feeling really safe, knowing that we can sort of trust others and trust ourselves. So they're really essential in healthy relationships. They, so for the girls, it meant that they created that trust with us when there were people around that they were not able to trust. But then in our adult lives, it also means that I like to say boundaries create respect. So I also say, think of boundaries as being a bit like your home. So hopefully you have walls and a front door and possibly a front garden or a wall or a fence around that. And that fence stops people trampling on your garden or their dogs doing their business on your flowers and the front door is another level of that boundary. So you might open that door and just stand and talk to somebody on the doorstep. You decide who comes in to that sort of closer space and who doesn't. You decide when, do you open your door at night or not? Most of us wouldn't open our door in the middle of the night. So you can decide when people come in, and when they do come in, do they take the shoes off? Do they take their coat off? Do they get a cuppa? Do they sit on your sofa, or are they just standing in your hall? So it's about, these are your decisions and although I'm using this example of a home or a house, these are your decisions of kind of rules and expectations, if you like, that protect you. So they protect you physically, emotionally, mentally, but also it's about a protection of kind of time, energy, and emotions as well.
Okay. And do you think women are particularly poor at setting boundaries? Are we worse than men? And if so, why?
I almost hate to admit this, but yes, I do think women are not as good at setting boundaries. And I think there can be a range of reasons, and for each individual, it's never one clear thing. So often when I work with people on boundaries, we usually start with a little bit of digging about personal feelings or circumstances so that we can identify those gaps. But for the benefit of the listeners, it might be, some really common ones might be around, well, generally women are kind of more in touch with feelings. We have bigger feelings. We've got generally, I'm being really stereotypical now, but generally a more caring nature, very naturally, and we want to help or we want to be involved. We also then, that means that we have more feelings of kind of guilt or pressure, or we want to please and be liked, or we put other people's needs before our own. It might be about a fear of rejection. We're kind of hardwired. We used to live in tribes and communities, so we don't want to be kind of cast out into the wilderness, and so we are cautious of other people's reactions. And on that similar vein, it might be about a fear of conflict. Well, who really does want conflict, really? I know I certainly wouldn't, and I'm pretty good at setting boundaries, but I still wouldn't want conflict. But so the guilt is a big driver again that I've said. It might make us back down from big decisions. It might be about pressure of workload, that we don't want to let people down, or we don't want to be seen as lazy. It might be that we don't want to miss out on a particular client or a job promotion. So it might be about some level of security. So you can see there's quite a lot of things, but sometimes there's a kind of deep feeling that kind of just kind of churns up in your kind of chest or in your gut in some kind of way that has us feeling really uncomfortable. And then we will respond to that, whereas men can often kind of just carry on with their sort of target goal and what it is that they want.
So you mentioned agreeableness. So you think that if people are more agreeable, they're more likely to put other people's needs before their own, and therefore sort of trample over their own boundaries or not assert them because their need to be liked, their need to make someone else feel good, trumps their own need to protect their time, energies or feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. So like with the example that I give about the house and the fence and people trampling over our flowers is kind of, but people will trample over our feelings if we don't say, that's where you stop. So it might be, some of those consequences might be about people not feeling kind of heard, or they might want to be liked, or they want to be seen as helpful. So I had a client, Becky, who was, she used to come away from the school PTA meetings, and she was there always making cakes. She was always the one that volunteered, I'll help with the school fair, or I'll do the cake sale, or something like that. And she would come away to me and she'd say, why do I always say yes to these things when I don't really want to do them, or nobody else volunteers? And so we kind of dug in a little bit on what it was about that. But yes, we do have those bigger feelings, and we want to make sure that we don't let other people down. But what can happen is that we end up being quite resentful. Sometimes, other people are.
Is that one of the consequences?
Yeah, resentfulness.
Is that a consequence of poor boundaries then, like resentment? And what are other consequences? Either if we don't enforce boundaries or we don't set them in the first place.
Okay. So it might be, the consequences might be that somebody kind of doesn't feel heard or respected, or, can almost feel that they're not being treated very well, or then we can become a bit resentful of things like in our work or in our business, maybe because we're kind of working all hours, or we're doing more than somebody else because we're kind of willing or able. So for a lot of women in business, it does mean that they were kind of fitting things around kids and responding day and night. But not only does that make us unhappy in our work, we might resent colleagues or clients, and that also then can have a negative impact on our mental health and well-being as well, because it's taking up time and energy for things either that we don't really want to do, that we don't have time to do, or because we're being asked to do things or being treated in some way, or there's an expectation on us that is not what we want to be doing.
And so the opposite of that, healthy boundaries. So can they actually improve our relationships with others and give us confidence?
Yeah, absolutely. So where these social workers said to me, these children just need firm boundaries, they are a key part of us all kind of knowing where we stand, knowing what to expect, and other people know what you expect from them. So, and what that does is that kind of gives us that that kind of scaffolding, if you like, or that kind of fence around us that I've mentioned before, that gives us that feeling of safety, knowing where we are, knowing what we can do, knowing what we can't do. So in work, we would have a contract of employment, we would have days of holiday listed, we would have times of work and things. If we don't have that, we have people kind of figuring out and possibly even worrying and fretting about whether things are right or wrong. Should I stay longer? Should I go home? But in friendships, in other relationships with maybe clients or work colleagues, we can be letting people know what is supportive and what is respected, what's okay with us, and what's not okay, basically, on a really basic level. So when we have those healthy boundaries across all relationships, whether they're professional or personal, when we are not worrying about having to, oh God, is this person going to ask me to do such and such that I really don't want to do? Or, oh God, this person's always ringing me at 8 o'clock at night and I'm trying to, I don't know, sort the kids or even just relax or something. We then don't have those kind of worries or concerns or uncomfortable feelings. So then, conversely, we have more confidence in ourselves to be able to say what's okay and what's not okay.
So how can we set better boundaries? How do we know where to draw the line?
So this is something I love helping people do. And we can have times or places, like I said, when we feel uncomfortable. So for a lot of people, it's about recognising that and look at what's happening and figure out how we can set better boundaries. So as an example, when I was in this corporate environment, there was a lady called Pat, and she used to ring me and for a catch up and then ask for advice on how to do something. And then bizarrely, I would hang up and end up that I was doing this job, task or activity for her. But very quickly, I kind of realised, hang on, how come I'm doing this again? So then I was, okay, that's a bit of it, it's not fair, or she's taking the mickey out of me, or some other uncomfortable feeling. But then what I did was I began to see that this kind of thing happened with Pat. So then whenever she rung up, I was a bit more on guard. I didn't absolutely do any multitasking. I was sort of super alert to enable me to. And then I had some sort of stock phrases as well, sometimes that were kind of like, I can't do that justice today. I can't fit that into my routine, and I can't fit that into my day until next week, or some short phrases that I felt I could say, which was one of the ways that you can kind of set better boundaries. So you recognise what's happening, you recognise the feeling, and then you can develop some kind of set phrases and things like that in the way that we communicate. But the other thing that we can do around setting boundaries is kind of the stuff that we can do within ourselves that are like within our control in the first place. So we don't even need to begin to kind of talk to other people. So particularly, you know, for women and women in business that I expect will be listening to this, is that we set out our own expectations. So this might be in a contract or a terms of agreement or other such document, maybe with our clients and things. So we set out how we work and what we expect of them, and maybe have your working hours in that, or you put your working hours in a signature. This was a massive thing that I really encourage people to do through COVID. Or use an out of office or an auto responder saying, oh, I'll get back to you, I've got your email and I'll get back to you in 24 hours or whatever, you know, or I only work Monday to Thursday and so I'll respond within those times. Some of those boundaries are as well about kind of almost setting your own work hours or your own times that you are going to be available for other people, whether that's friends, family, clients and things like that. So it might be that you need to pack away your office so that you're not tempted to have a quick look in the evening or in the weekends and then, oh gosh, an hour later and you're still sat there, you know. And also, we're in this fast-paced world with technology is around us the whole time. And I, you know, say to people, really, turn off those notifications so it doesn't ping and disturb you or distract you or have you thinking about, oh my gosh, I wonder if I need to answer that straight away and what is that, and you know, the kids want the bedtime story or you're trying to get tea ready and things. So in essence, that's setting the boundaries. It can start with yourself and get technology to work for you rather than be switched on all the time, but then also look at ways that you can communicate with other people. But also it's shifting your mindset as well about it not being rigid or strict or harsh, you know, or, but they're not flimsy or non-existent as well, really. So we just need to be firm and fair, but really clear with these boundaries that we are kind of setting out.
So what is is language, it sounds like language is really important in communicating boundaries. And if so, what are some of the words we should avoid and what are some of the words that are good around boundaries?
So I always say that no is a complete sentence. But, you know, what I mean with that is that when we waffle, we give somebody more space to try and kind of eke it in and try and persuade us. So we might say something like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, I really want to help, but I've got these other things to do by the end of the week, and oh, if I could help I would, if I could squeeze it in. So do you see what I mean by all the kind of waffle, by the big apologies that, oh, I feel really bad in that. Whereas if we kind of take a deep breath first and then go, I'd like to help you out there, but I'm not able to do it justice right now, it means we're letting that person down gently but firmly, with a kind of positive tone, so that way that we communicate, and it doesn't enable, where with the other way, oh, I've got all these other things to do, oh, but it won't take you long, I wish I could help, we could do a little bit, if I could squeeze it in, yes, you could squeeze it in on. Do you see? So we're making space for people to come back in with yes, but just it's only type sort of phraseology. What I, you know, some other ways can be kind of, you know, that sounds really interesting. However, I don't have capacity right now. One of the other things that, because I started my business 10 years ago with the kids being around, there's no way that they needed so much time and attention, which was why I needed to leave the corporate job. There's no way I could have done any semblance of multitasking, you know, maybe doing a client call or anything with the attention that they needed. So my sort of diary and availability to work was really small and condensed in the day. So I would simply say to people, I don't have availability right now, or I don't have availability at that time. And I didn't have to go in and say, oh, but my kids will be home from school then, and they're really needy or they're really difficult. And I didn't have to do any of that. I don't have availability. Do you see what I mean? And it's really clear and it's really simple. And there's no apology in there. It's a statement of fact. Do you see what I mean? So, but if people think that they're going to kind of struggle with that, because that face-to-face saying to people right at the very beginning of learning to set boundaries can be difficult. So, we can use, let me look at my schedule, or let me look into this and I'll get back to you. Or I'll think about it. I think when we talked separately, we said it's a bit like with the kids that, oh God, I can't be doing with their tantrum or kick off or moaning right now. So you say, I'll think about it. And it gives you that breathing space to move away from the pressure or guilt or whatever big feeling you've got on that situation. And even if you know you're going to say no, you can get yourself in the right place and go back to them and say no. Or send a text or an email and say, I've looked at my commitments. I have to say no. Good luck with your plan. So it's all positive still. But that language there, again, so what I mean is avoid waffle, avoid apologies.
Definitely, that's really good advice. And I think that is something I always teach people in business and freelance work as well. When clients kind of asking you things and either you don't want to give that information out, like pricing, for example, you don't want to say it face to face, or you don't want to commit face to face and you don't know how to say it. Just saying to them, I'll come back to you by email. Can I send you an email on that? And buying yourself that time, but then also not having that kind of like the speaking to them face to face. It's much easier to type or put it on an email than it is to say face to face. So what can we do if we've set our boundary, we've told someone our boundary, and they still keep coming back to us and they're not really respecting that, and then we're kind of maybe feeling like either like I'm going to cave in and just do it. Well, how can we tell if someone is pushing back on our boundaries or maybe even ignoring them completely? And then what can we do to enforce that?
Okay. So, I mean, one of the biggest things really that I say to people is that the people that need those boundaries setting the most are the ones that are going to push back on it. And so it is kind of about trying our best to stand our ground. The people that are pushing back are going to be doing that kind of what I've just mentioned about, but it won't take you long, but you're good at this, and those sorts of phraseology, trying to persuade, trying to get you to do things, or just this one thing, or just turn up for, and things like that. Usually the kind of just type responses. Those are the people that are going to push back. Also, the other bit that I mentioned earlier was about how do you feel? So if you're feeling uncomfortable with somebody, even though you're being clear and just really no waffle, sorry, can't do that, I don't have availability, those kind of things, and that they are still kind of trying to persuade you or get, coaxing, cajoling and all of those things. Those people are ignoring your boundaries, but you are not responsible for how other people react to your boundaries. It's never your fault. You don't have to make them feel better or take responsibility. You are only responsible for your own feelings and actions. And again, it's like that fence. Somebody has kicked down that fence, and then it's not our job to then go, oh, I'm so sorry that fence was in your way. It's very much, that was my fence and you've just kicked it down. So what can we do to enforce it? Well, as I said, some people will respond poorly, and it's usually those who will benefit from those boundaries. They need things repeating. It takes time to learn new responses, new behaviours. We do sometimes get people that are angry or try and manipulate and coerce, and that can be, really hard and quite scary. Okay. The biggest tip I would say is the silence. Silence is really powerful. So instead of jumping in and answering the questions, or instead of doing the request and getting on with the job because, oh, it's the easiest thing to do, or it's just shut them up or whatever, silence can be scary for people, but silence can also be your superpower. So now that you know silence is a powerful tool, it enables you to stand your ground and give you thinking time. Often when we use silence, the other person jumps in anyway, with perhaps a different offer or a different request or another solution. So silence enables that person to reflect and consider. Now, even if it is, oh, don't worry, I'll go and ask somebody else, or I'll get so-and-so to do it instead, or I'll do it myself. That's fine, because you can only set your own boundaries. So, and the other people then need to learn their own way of pushing back. Or conversely, the other people that may be going to go and ask, or the other things that they're going to do, might be a better fit. So, use silence to give us that calm, that thinking time, to take those deep breaths and just kind of hold your ground. But it also is powerful for somebody else.
That's a really good tip. One of the things I always say, like I had a friend who was a freelancer and her clients were always doing that kind of service creep, when they're just kind of taking a bit more. And she found it really hard to say no. And one day a client asked her to come in and go and do a day of training with them. And it was about a 3-hour drive away from her. And she didn't feel she could ask them for payment for that day. And she didn't know how to really handle the situation. And I said, well, why don't you flip it round? So this person is salary, they're employee, they're getting paid, and they're expecting you to drive a 6-hour round drive and pay for your petrol. Would you think if you asked them on a Sunday when they weren't getting paid in their free time to drive to you and spend a day with you for free, would they do that? And she said, well, of course they wouldn't. I said, well, then why do you think it's okay for them to expect that of you? And sometimes I think it really helps to flip it around, because often I find that the people who are stepping over boundaries are actually the ones that would not allow it to happen to them. And so if you flip it round and think, would this person, if I did that to that person and asked them how they would feel, can give you the courage sometimes to enforce your boundaries. Do you think that's true? It's a good point.
It's absolutely true, because, and that example really enables people to, away from the situation, kind of get in touch with those feelings and see that picture really, really clearly, but from that kind of different perspective. So, yeah, absolutely, I would agree with you. And we do. As women in particular, again, going back to we want to be helpful and we don't want to say no to things. We don't want that kind of rejection. Oh, this is our client, so we feel we must do the extra, because what if we say no, they might not pay us and things. But actually, sometimes we need to point these things out to people, and sometimes we can point them out to people in a really clear way, and that other person has just not thought about it because they're in their own frame of reference, i.e. I'm salaried, so whatever I do is I didn't think about the petrol cost because my business and my work pays for the car and things. So they just are not in your shoes at all.
Definitely. I have one final question. This is the real biggie, because so far we've all talked about other people, setting boundaries for other people, and those other people maybe not respecting them. But actually, the worst offender of crossing boundaries is usually ourselves. That we're really bad in respecting our own boundaries. And as you say, like the woman at the PTA, just like volunteering herself, not even being asked, and trampling over her own boundaries. So how can we stop doing that? How can we stop ourselves from abusing our own boundaries?
Okay, so you're absolutely right. And this is why, just to remind kind of all the listeners, this is why I often say, get your own stuff sorted first, with the kind of switch your computer off and use an out of office and things like that. We need to get really, really specific on what we want and why it's important. And this will help to remind us. It's a bit like, having a vision board or our goals set and things. This will help us to remind us to be able to communicate those needs and to sort of keep on track when things are tough. So for me personally, it was like I wanted to appear professional to my clients. So it's slightly gone out the window because of COVID. But, you know, I wanted to appear professional, and I didn't want my kids sort of screaming and fighting in the background, or, you know, nagging and interrupting me and things like that. People have been a bit more flexible about that since COVID. But, you know, organisations are now still wanting people to go back to the office and things like that. So it doesn't mean that that has been here to stay. But so what I wanted to appear professional. I also wanted to make sure I had proper time and attention for the kids. I wanted to make sure I wasn't pulled every which way. I needed to make sure I kind of looked after myself. So when you think about what is it that you want to be able to do or feel or achieve, so you dig into those priorities and you remind yourself of these. And then you find that the really good boundaries that you set, they free you up to be able to do those things. Is it time with the kids? Is it, you know, a proper day off? Or, you know, or is it even just that cup of coffee that you actually drink when it's hot? You know, or is it helping you to feel more confident? So when you dig deep or listen to your gut, if you like, that, you know, where I said that boundaries is about feeling safe, feeling comfortable. We need to put ourselves first. We need to acknowledge our own feelings. So that can stop us from ignoring them. And when we begin to set them, yes, we might have some bits of that kind of guilty, or maybe, I don't know, maybe selfish or mean or whatever, because it's new. But it's not because it's something that you're doing wrong. Your needs are valid, and setting boundaries will get easier the more that you do it. You know, and as I said, I kind of reverted to, you know, not saying no to the toddler type thing. But, you know, if you're a parent, you know that you have to repeatedly set rules. And you said right at the beginning, these need looking at and reinforcing and setting all the time. We need to continuously set boundaries. We can't just kind of set one and be done with it. We might need to set the same boundary repeatedly with ourselves or with other people. And then those needs will change, just like they changed when my kids grew up and I was able to do longer hours, or when I was then working into organisations and things like that. So it's about remembering and looking at what's important with your own values, why you're setting this, what you want out of this. So it is a bit get in touch with your feelings, bit to remind you, because our feelings are our biggest driver, really. So I suppose, the thing is really remembering that if you forget or give in, or struggle in any of the early days of doing this, or at any point in time, you know, the biggest thing is remember to be kind to yourself about doing these new things, but also be kind to yourself about the reasons why you want some boundaries in there.
Absolutely. And it is really important to sort of come back to that and remind ourselves. And I think one of the key things is that we are prepared to put our own feelings second, and we are more willing to be wanting to be liked by other people than we are to really respect ourselves. And I think it's learning to like yourself enough that your needs have to come first.
Absolutely. But then also, you know, remembering what I say is that boundaries do create respect. So just because you're setting a boundary, it doesn't mean that somebody's not going to respect you. Boundaries do create respect, but it is very much about putting yourself first.
Definitely. I don't know if you remember, like, you were at school and you had some teachers who were really firm but fair, and you liked them. And there was always that teacher that couldn't control the class, you know, and that had no boundaries at all. And they weren't the teachers who were liked, they weren't the teachers who were respected, and they weren't actually any good because they couldn't teach you. And so it's a bit like that, isn't it? Like, if you think about the teachers you really liked and respected, usually they had quite good boundaries.
Oh, absolutely. That's a perfect example, because we did, even just in one day, have the ability to see the difference between good boundaries and poor boundaries. So yeah, that's a brilliant example, Hannah. Yeah.
So I think the final thing is, don't be that supply teacher that can't control the class, and the class is your life, basically.
I love that. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Emma, for coming on here today. It's such a fascinating topic, and you've shared really, really good advice and really good insights and examples. If people want to find you, where can they go?
Okay, so I'm predominantly on LinkedIn, Emma Langton, and I have a website which is emmalangton.com as well. There's also my own podcast which is called Lessons for Leaders, which is available on all the usual podcast platforms as well. But yes, this is one of my favourite subjects, so I could talk all day.
Great. Thank you so much, Emma.
Thank you for having me.